Good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to have you here for the next Spotlight discussion at Politico's Healthcare Summit. My name is Mary Eccles, and I'm a health reporter here at Politico in Brussels. This session will focus on AI, specifically how AI will revolutionize health access and efficacy. So, strong words indeed. And hopes are very high for the promise of AI in our health sector. Proponents say it can help detect diseases or rifle through drug combinations at lightning speed with the help of a machine learning algorithm, or deliver personalized 24/7 care from chatbots trained on medical know-how, or help solve the workforce crisis by freeing up time for under-the-cosh practitioners through automating manual tasks. On the other side of the coin, we have others who warn governments not to over-rely on AI, saying that they could enhance rather than reduce inequalities and still leave health systems facing the same old problems. Additionally, I'd like to remind everyone following along online or in the room to talk about the summit on social media using our hashtag #PoliticoHealthcare. So, helping us disentangle some of the hopes from the myths, from the reality, are my three excellent panelists. So please give a warm welcome to Peter Arlott, Head of Data Analytics and Methods Task Force at the European Medicines Agency, Martijn Hartjes, a Business Unit Leader at Clinical Informatics at Philips, and Sophia Palmieri, a researcher in AI and health at Ghent University. Welcome. So I think I have to say, whenever I attend these kind of events, there's always quite a lot of interest in AI and health, but sometimes not necessarily a huge amount of understanding of what's actually on the market at the moment, the extent to which AI is currently being used in our health systems or in the health sector more generally in Europe. So I was wondering, perhaps, Martijn, if you could set the scene a little bit and help us explain to what extent AI is currently being used in our health sector.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for having me to talk about this topic. AI, I think, started really to get adopted, I would say, 2018 in kind of clinical practice. Of course, there was a huge hype behind that. If we now look back, I think the promise at that time of how fast this would be adopted was maybe a bit overhyped. We do see some barriers, maybe we can talk about later, on adoption. But where I see AI adopted the most currently in the healthcare sector is basically, there's three areas where it can apply. The first one, which is getting really to high adoption, is productivity improvements. So optimizing workflows, making sure that small tasks are automated and go faster, so the right information is available for somebody to make a decision faster. The second area is more clinical decision support, so enabling, for instance, a radiologist to look at more quantitative data, results faster, to make the decision, but also have more information to make a better decision. And the last one, which is not yet very much adopted, but a big promise, is more predictive AI, where multi data sources are combined, and where you can maybe predict potentially what a certain treatment can do to a patient.
Thanks. Peter, I was wondering, perhaps from a regulatory side, if you could explain a little bit about maybe some of the applications you're seeing at the EMA. It might give us a sense of kind of like what's coming down the pipeline.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe just to start by saying I regulate the pharmaceutical industry. I'm a medicines regulator. So the examples I'll draw on are on what I know. So firstly, as a European regulatory network, so the national agencies and the European Medicines Agency, we have a vision for realizing the benefits of AI and in terms of productivity, in terms of insights from healthcare data, and in terms of better decision-making during the development of medicines, on the authorization of medicines, and on optimizing them on the market. I think we're talking about the here and now. So we believe there are benefits right through the life cycle. So in drug development, in better design of clinical trials, selecting the right patients, to have faster, smarter clinical trials, to get products to the market faster. In terms of collection and management of data and checking for data quality, for example. Faster regulatory assessment and better regulatory decisions based on productivity tools, but also knowledge mining tools. and then better safety and effectiveness of products on the market. So better safety monitoring through AI applied to very large sets of healthcare data. It's definitely here and now. We give advice to companies coming in who are using or wanting to use AI in those different stages of a life cycle. So example, clinical trials, example, their application for a marketing authorization application. We're also putting out guidance so that industry understand the parameters within which we will assess their products. And we are already seeing automation, including within the European Medicines Agency. Maybe just one example, we have put into production a knowledge mining tool, which means that when we give advice to a company on the design of a clinical trial, for example, we can knowledge mine using AI tools the whole body of previous advice given. So whereas before it might have relied on the expertise of one or two individuals remembering what had been said before, now we can just mine the data banks held within the European Medicines Agency and give better and faster advice.
Thank you. And kind of staying with, I suppose, some of the opportunities as well of AI in health. I know there's been a lot of talk around it possibly helping to solve the workforce crisis, and you mentioned productivity, both of you. I'm just wondering, Sophia, what do you see as being like the natural benefit of AI, or are there any obvious gaps you see it filling at the moment in the health system?
Well, for sure, helping the workforce is one of the aim of the AI in healthcare. But what I'm more concerned about is whether we actually have the instrument to implement artificial intelligence in a constructive way, which is understanding AI and actually implement it through the healthcare professional force in a beneficial way. And what I'm seeing and what I'm focusing on right now is really implementing competencies for healthcare professionals that allows them, and then afterwards allows the patients to use artificial intelligence in an actual beneficial way. Because we can talk about access, we can talk about the benefits of AI, but if the people that are supposed to use artificial intelligence in daily practice are not familiar with it, are not trusting the system, then we have a bit of an implementation issue there.
And would you say that is an issue at the moment around maybe like digital literacy, or like is the workforce prepared for it? Are the public prepared for it, do you think? Or is there more work need to be done in that area?
Well, we have much to do in that area. I mean, both looking at healthcare professionals, but also patients. So starting with healthcare professionals, well, they are very interested, they are very captivated by the idea of artificial intelligence, but at the same time, they have a bit of a trust issue there. Because of a lack of competence, and I'm not suggesting that healthcare professionals should be competent in machine learning, like basic knowledge, right? But we have to improve somehow the feeling that might be beneficial to their practice. And this is already happening. For example, at Mons University, I think, they started an interdisciplinary course on artificial intelligence for healthcare, and that's incredibly useful. At the same time, I've seen in multiple universities already here in Belgium, but also somewhere else in Europe, universities start to implement artificial intelligence education at an early stage, so not anymore in the continuous development of healthcare professionals, but already in the early stage of the education. When it comes to patient, it's even more complicated, because we are still discussing health literacy in general and how to implement health literacy broadly, not just in this kind of bubbles of discussion, right? Mm-hmm. So when it comes to digital health literacy, is even more challenging, especially if you see how many people have access to smartphones, how many people have access to internet. So then to actually have a conversation over healthcare access and digital literacy, we have to really look at the number and really see whether we are benefiting people outside Brussels, let's say.
I think that's a really interesting question around trust as well. And I mean, you mentioned already that in the EMA that you're already implementing, certain uses of AI. How does that go down within the EMA? Is there any kind of reticence from people, or are people generally in favour? They can see the benefits, or does it take some convincing?
Well, it's a good question. So I think overall there's enthusiasm to see if we can get medicines, better medicines to patients faster, if you like. And so people are aligned in that as a goal, as a vision. And I think people can see that AI can be part of that. I think what you need is leadership. You need to set out your vision for better medicines and for safe and reliable use of artificial intelligence. You need to train up your workforce. So if it's becoming ubiquitous, people will be using it in their home lives, and even if they're not using it in the work environment. So people, I think, are becoming rather familiar, not necessarily with all of the risks that might be there, things like security and so on, but they are certainly getting familiar with using it. So you need a vision. You need governance in place, and one of the things that we've done about a year ago now is establish a risk management team, if you like, a committee on risk assessment on artificial intelligence, in a little bit preempting the AI Act, because we need to ensure full data protection, data security, fundamental rights. We also need to make sure that when we make a decision to put an AI tool into practice, we know what we're doing. We know what the risks are. If there are risks, we can manage them actively. So I think it's governance, it's having a vision, and it's training up your workforce.
I mean, you mentioned governance, leadership, and also the AI Act. I wanted to come to you to get the industry's perspective on that, because I think, the previous session was talking about the European health data space, and from an industry side, it definitely seems like there's loads of enthusiasm for that, or at least its potential. Whereas when I speak to people about the AI Act, there's often like a bit more of a muted response, maybe a bit of confusion. So I'm just wondering, what's your take on the AI Act, and what kinds of response have you got from, or what's the response of industry?
Yeah, I'll try to address that point. Maybe first I can build on the leadership point that you made, because I think that's a very important one. We every year do a health survey across 4,000 healthcare professionals. I think one of the things that we started to see, as we do it every year, that currently in health systems, leadership, 92% of them see AI as a solution to solve their efficiency problems. But the users, I think to your point, that need to use the AI, they're still a trust issue. So I think the data is also showing this, but leadership is there, and I think it's starting to trickle down. Then your question on the EU AI Act. Look, we very much support that there's regulations, there's clarity around the use of AI. We do see concerns in terms of the different regulations that are there. So the combination with MDR and the potential overlap or disconnect between the two. Ideally, there's one set of regulations that are super clear and relatively easy to use. Maybe we should use AI to actually, like to your point, to make that easier. Because I do see that if I look globally where we deploy our solutions, we are starting to become actually challenged to bring innovation fast to market. So there's regions and markets that adopt much faster. Maybe not because of the right reason, because maybe regulation is lacking, but definitely it will lead to what we call reverse innovation, where emerging markets will adopt these technologies much faster, and we will become less competitive in Europe.
I mean, you talked about the overlap there with some other regulation, and that's, again, something that's come up quite often. Could you give any sort of concrete examples of how that prevents innovation? I'm just trying to understand, how exactly that works.
It's mostly time. First of all, understanding the regulations and what you need to comply to. It's quite complex to bring a medical device to market in terms of the whole process of design controls, verification, validation. And of course, that all needs to be compliant. I think the MDR has really helped a lot to create clarity, but still, some of the regulations are not super clear. And then if there's another act that comes on top of it, where our teams need to basically combine those, it's better to have, let's say, one clear regulation on how we bring these things together. The other piece is the EU AI Act is a horizontal act across all different areas. If you just look at the vertical medical device, there might be differences in approach, and you might need to tailor it. So I think there's still room to make it easier and clearer, because that will help time to market, but also it will help compliance to the regulations.
One of the concerns, obviously, around AI is that or is trying to make sure that the data that's used is actually good quality data, and so that it doesn't actually exacerbate biases. Sophia, I don't know if you want to come in on that, but how do you ensure that the data is good quality?
Sure, I can come in on that, but I also want to echo Martijn in something he said, because I think the AI Act, I'm very passionate to the topic. So the AI Act and the medical device regulation indeed overlaps on many points. And one of the most problematic things, correct me if I'm wrong, but is like really the access to the market, because the medical device regulation and the AI Act, like, how do you say, detail that passage in very different ways. And so now the problem is really bringing the two together and see, okay, we have a lex specialis, which is the one that is supposed to apply to medical devices, right? Because we are in the medical field. But then we have this horizontal regulation that is telling us, oh, there is also another way to get to the market, and we are not really sure where to apply our label, our CE label, at what point of the streamlined process. So that's incredibly interesting. When it comes to data quality, together with working at Ghent University, I'm also working in the European Institute for Innovation through Health Data, and we do a lot of work on data quality. My colleagues did an amazing job in trying to detail what does it mean to have data quality that is fit for purpose, because that's a bit the problem, right? So it's amazing to discuss data quality on a very general level, and we would be repeating always the same concept, that they don't have to be biased, they have to be representative, and so forth. But I think at this stage, what is missing is a more detailed assessment tool to know whether your artificial intelligence is actually representing a sufficient quality of data for the purpose of your medical device. So we are a bit trying to work on that. And I think in that sense, data quality is also very much linked to bringing all the stakeholders together. Why do I say that? Because what we think is perhaps data quality for a manufacturer is substantially different than data quality for a healthcare professional. And this is also coming a bit together with what one of the previous panelists said. Healthcare professional label data in a very specific way that is according to their practice of healthcare, right? While for manufacturers, for research, the labeling of data happens in a very different way. So I think to have qualitative data, we really have to agree on some assessment tools, on some, I don't know, very basic and very deep down technique to understand what does it mean to have qualitative data.
We hear quite a lot of exciting claims, I think, from industry specifically about the time and money saved by AI, especially in terms of drug development and certainly at a preclinical testing level. As I say, lots of these claims do come from industry, so I wanted to get a bit of a reality check from you, Peter, at a regulatory level to say, like, how substantial are the savings that AI can provide at a drug development level?
Okay, so we don't have data quantifying time saved. And the claims you make, I don't know which bit of industry they're coming from. Maybe they're from those that are offering services to reduce time. The feedback we get is from the pharmaceutical companies, not the medical devices companies, who are discovering and developing their drugs. And they are most of big pharma is embracing artificial intelligence because they can see the benefits, and they're already using them, often in an experimental way. So they will try something out, learn from it, try it out, perhaps in a slightly different way, and so on. So I think that speaks for itself, actually, that people are seeing benefits in terms of efficiency. And clearly, the cost of getting a drug to the market is a serious issue in terms of getting innovation to patients. And I think pharma is very interested in reducing those costs, and cost and time correlate, obviously.
A question to all of you, perhaps, actually. We've talked a lot about the opportunities of AI in health. What would you say are the limits? Like, are there areas where you think the two shouldn't necessarily be intersecting?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go on then.
Okay. So I'm going to be a little bit parrot-like. I believe, and the position of the medicines regulators in Europe in general, is that in the area of medicines regulation, so I'm talking about medicines now, not medical devices, there are benefits at discovery, non-clinical development, clinical development, marketing authorization applications, so getting the product on the market, as well as in the post-authorization monitoring phase. We're pretty convinced about that. The point is, though, that we need to focus on delivering those benefits. We need to experiment and do it in a safe and risk-managed way. And if we do that, so experiment and have an expert workforce, we believe that right through the life cycle of a medicine, there will be benefits.
Yeah, I think maybe to clarify one thing, and then I'll explain why, where I think there's still risk. If the way we currently implement AI in many of the devices that we deliver to market or in our software solutions, these are basically AI-trained algorithms. So they don't change, right? So they are not self-learning. They are basically tested and trained through machine learning or other techniques. So they are AI-based algorithms, but they will every time do the same thing. So they are controlled, right? So I think that's an important piece. I think where we still see risk is with self-learning AI algorithms being used in clinical practice. So because we don't yet fully understand what is then happening, and we need to find the right control mechanisms to do that, which we're of course investigating, because that's in the end where you want to go. But I think that's an area of risk. I think the other area of risk is, and we're investigating this deeply with our users, is by implementing AI in a workflow, what does that do to the user? So do they start to trust that AI? And the moment, because we always implement AI with oversight, so there's always a final decision by a human. The moment they start to get biased by the AI is always right, right? So they have seen it 20 times. 21st time is not right. What does that do to a person? So we do also a lot of observational research on the impact of AI on the human behavior and also the quality of care that they deliver. We see a lot of the benefits, but these are the areas I think that we need to continue to investigate together with our partners in the clinic to make sure that we reduce the risk.
Just jumping in, I think one of the main risks that I see is indeed coming back to the clinical validation, the fact that perhaps our systems indeed change over time, and we are still not very sure about how to keep that clinical validation up to date when our system change, right? So that's, for me, one of the main risks that strike me, together with another that perhaps is a legal fascination. So perhaps you can jump in here and tell me if I'm wrong. One of the things that I'm reflecting upon recently is the role of the human oversighter, right? And coming back again to the role of competencies and implementing virtuous workforce that use artificial intelligence, is how are we sure that the human that is supposed to oversight the process actually understand what is going on and actually know how to use the system, how to intervene. And also because from a regulatory point of view, this is actually a crucial point. What I mean is that the whole architecture of the AI Act heavily rely on this human behind a machine. But if that person is not competent, then the whole structure of the AI Act is kind of shaking. So this is one, for me, not only a risk, but also a fascination that I think we have to solve in the coming months.
We have a few minutes left now, actually, so I'm wondering if we have any questions from our audience for the panel. We should have a roving mic somewhere. Do we? Thank you. I think we have a question from this lady here down the front. So, yeah, just state your name and your organisation and who the question's for as well. Oh, thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much for this very interesting panel. Rama Rajdi from United States Press Agency. I'm the correspondent at the French presidency. I'm glad that you all brought up the question of the biases. So this is a very huge risk, and this is a very big issue to tackle, in the future, and the very soon future, I guess. My question is around the quality of the information. You all brought up the capacity of delivering and processing massive data and delivering this in a very short and fast time. But what about the quality? Because Mrs. Sophia, you brought up the problem of the competency and the skills of people behind this. But what about the quality of the information itself? How can we know that it's accurate? And do I have to do it again or check it again? And what is the counter system to this AI that is giving me so much summarize of information? Thank you.
think was that for you, Sophia, or did you want to come in, Martin?
Yeah, and I can at least talk about how we how we try to approach that. I think, of course, it's also a learning process. So we see that, of course, when AI started to get developed, it started maybe in one academic center with a certain data set from that academic center and that patient population. An AI algorithm was built. And of course, you go through the whole process of verification and validation with certain assumptions. You do clinical trials to test it. What you see then over time is that we are learning, but also the regulators that we work together with are learning how broad these data sets should be, right? So the concept of bias at one point came in, the concept of if you have data from one patient population, let's say Asia, and you want to implement it in North America, there's differences. So over time, we have started to learn, at least for now, what we know a good quality data set looks like. And also regulators are learning about this as well. And we try to also, in these discussions with the regulators, set new rules and new boundaries on what a good quality data set looks like. I do think if I look at the algorithms that we develop today, the testing is very rigid. There's also clinical trials that we do to compare it to standard techniques. There's always comparison to the human aspect of it, which is also not always perfect. So I do think that we can, for the devices that we bring out in the market, we have pretty good and very good confidence that the quality of data has been there. Now, if we need to do this with large data sets, this becomes more complex. So I think we're really at that verge now of taking the next step to secure that. So it's not a one-sided answer, but it's a learning process, but we are making a lot of progress on it.
Yeah, I'll jump in saying, I've tried to say it before, but probably I didn't articulate it correctly. So one of the issue indeed for data quality is being sure that the information you have is fitting the purpose you want to have with that medical device. So it's what Martin is trying to say. When you have a purpose for the medical device that is way broader than the data you have, then you have an issue. But for example, if we are implementing, and I think at this stage is most of the cases, you have medical devices that are supposed to supply or to serve a very small population, then the quality of those information, the quality of the data you have to give your artificial intelligence, it's way more easy to track the quality of those data. And at the same time, again, at the institute in which I have the luck to work on, we are trying to find assessment tools that, depending on the purpose of that medical device, will give you a sort of level of depthness, a level of quality for each characteristic of the data. So representativity, or also the kind of information that that data has to contain. So it really depends on the purpose, and I believe we need a more throughout assessment for data quality.
Just super quick and rather complimentary. I would take a step back from artificial intelligence and just talk about healthcare data in general, because artificial intelligence is the most advanced form of analytics. But there's classic biostatistics, there's epidemiological techniques. They all the data underlying them is the critical factor for all of them in terms of the insights you can draw from them and the quality of the decisions that are made. And I think what is critical is to understand the data, because particularly if it's secondary use of healthcare data, you haven't got a huge amount of influence over the primary data collection. So therefore, you need to really study the data, understand the population from which it was taken, and then that helps you decide on what uses it might be relevant for. So the population, the specific use, as Sophia was mentioning.
Thank you, and thanks for your question. I think we've got another question from this man over here. Yeah. Again, can you introduce yourself and say who the question's for?
Thank you. Beatrix Kopak, she, her, DEFRA, UKG. So there's been a bit of an under-theme today, I think, of One Health. So we had the kind of pandemics earlier, with the majority of the pandemics that affected us being zoonotic in origin, and references earlier to the importance of addressing environmental factors and the urban environment in actually delivering on healthcare needs. What I wanted to know was what experience you had or your thoughts on the use of AI for understanding those broader One Health data sets, either for new medications or for policy.
Is that to anyone in particular, or? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I personally don't have direct experience of using AI on AMR, for example. However, I think just from first principles, I can see the potential benefits, because if we're putting together large data sets from farm exposure, from food, from medicines, from prescribing, from healthcare systems, just to be able to compute requires us to use advanced analytics. So I think it's a really interesting question. Maybe it's an idea for researchers, regulators, and industry to explore in the future.
Cool. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any hands in the air, but we're also running out of time anyhow, so I'm going to ask everyone to give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next up, we have Claudia talking about medical devices, a panel on medical devices. I think the last of our summits so far, actually. Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, hi everyone, good afternoon. We're here, we made it to the last panel of our healthcare summit. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope there's been an array of interesting conversations. There is one last panel, so stay with me. My name is Claudia, I'm a health reporter here at Politico. This panel we're going to talk about medical devices and the medical devices regulation, or MDR. The medical devices regulation is the latest set of rules that the EU approved when they wanted to revise the laws that govern medical devices regulation in the continent. So they introduced 2 new regulations in 2017 that set out new safety standards and stricter requirements for medical devices. But there have been some issues with implementation from the beginning, some delays that also caused a lot of challenges both for manufacturers, but then doctors, clinicians, patients. So this is what we're going to talk about today. There has been recently more of a push to get the Commission to, again, take a look at this regulation to see if anything needs to be changed. The Commission has launched a targeted evaluation in 2024 to identify possible changes, and it has a public consultation planned for this year. So there are things in there happening, but at the same time, there are also some push for more urgent action. So we're going to talk about all this. First, let me introduce our great set of panelists here. We have Oliver Bisazza, Chief Executive Officer of MedTech Europe, Alan Fraser, Professor of Cardiology and Chair of the Regulatory Affairs Committee at Biomed Alliance, Damien Kenny, also cardiologist in Dublin, and MEP Katarina Martins, Portuguese lawmaker from the Left Group. So thank you all for joining us. It's great to have you here. I want to start by diving a little bit into what the problems and the issues are with the regulation, the way it's been implemented right now. So I'm going to hear from a little bit all of you, but I want to start with Oliver. So you represent with MedTech Europe much of the medical technology industry in Europe. What are you hearing from your members in terms of what are the most pressing issues that they are facing when they want to get the devices certified, when they want to get them on the market?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. First of all, the medical technology industry is an enormously innovative one. We are applying technology to healthcare across the full spectrum of patient care, whether it's diagnosis, treatment, monitoring, cure, medication follow-up, you name it. And it's one of Europe's most innovative sectors. And what are we hearing? First of all, just like in any other period, we're hearing that Europe goes through tremendous challenges, healthcare challenges and non-healthcare challenges, that we are asked to help try and address. Events like this have been a great reminder of those. Europe's facing challenges like an aging population, non-communicable diseases, the threat of more infectious disease pandemics potentially, not to mention the healthcare workforce, the challenges of greener and more sustainable healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The innovative power of our industry does stand ready to help solve and address those challenges, but it only works if innovative medical technologies can actually reach the European healthcare system. And that is the fundamental challenge with the medical technology regulations, the medical device regulation and the in vitro diagnostics medical device regulation. 7 years we've been implementing these 2 regulations, and unfortunately the regulatory framework, which is meant to be robust, predictable, sustainable, innovation-friendly, SME-friendly, are not yet meeting their stated objectives. And the consequence of this is that the benefits of medtech innovation are increasingly reaching European healthcare systems and patients in Europe later than healthcare systems and patients in other regions of the world. That's an existential challenge for Europe to address very, very quickly and very, very seriously, because Europe used to be the #1 region of the world in which to innovate this industry and in which to launch those innovations. So we need to fix the regulatory system so that industries like ours can actually help Europe get ahead of these challenges and start reversing the trend.
Sorry, I'll follow up with you real quick, because you're talking about like this the regulation that was supposed to be sustainable and foster innovation and still doesn't. But so what are in practice some of the issues the manufacturers face when?
Right. So manufacturers who want to put a medical device or an in vitro diagnostic through these regulations are facing a variety of challenges. The chief one, however, though, is incredibly long and unpredictable assessment timelines. There's administrative costs, there's a lot of regulatory work that needs to go into it as well. But at the end of the day, if a manufacturer has an exciting innovation that can respond to some of the challenges facing society, and we're trying to decide, do we launch this in Europe first? Do we launch it in Japan? Do we launch it in Asia Pacific? One of the biggest things holding Europe back right now is we simply do not have a reliable, predictable timeline for getting a decision on whether compliance with the regulation is achieved, yes or no. Mm-hmm. We put our devices through a complex certification system, and manufacturers tell us again and again and again, we put our file in, we were told we were going to get a decision within X number of days, and the reality is completely different. And we need predictability to be restored first and foremost, and we need those assessment timelines to be reasonable vis-a-vis what goes on in other parts of the world. Without that, it's no surprise that innovation is going to other parts of the world first, with Europe coming second, third, or fourth.
Thank you. Alan, I want to move to you also. So you represent, your role with Biomed Alliance brings more of the experience of the medical societies and then as a cardiologist. So what are you seeing? Do you agree with some of what the main challenges are right now for the industry?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. So as medical professional societies representing healthcare professionals, we fully supported the objectives for the recast of the directives. And we still strongly support those objectives, which was for higher levels of clinical evidence and more established, transparent proof of efficacy before new devices were introduced. However, we agree to some extent, obviously, with what Oliver and his colleagues say. Doctors and other healthcare professionals tend not to get involved in understanding details of European legislation. And so what we hear is only when they meet problems that they hadn't anticipated. And indeed, we have heard of shortages of devices, and I think Damien will speak in more detail about that in a moment. And we also hear colleagues who are involved in developing new devices comment about innovation. I think we have to be slightly careful here, because I'm only aware of a small number of academic studies looking at the safety of new devices and new drugs. And in all instances where there has been a regulatory jurisdiction worldwide that has allowed faster access by a special scheme, it has always come with increased risks. We do need innovation, but it's a term that comes with a lot of baggage, and we can't criticize innovation. What we actually need is effective new devices or effective new drugs. And there are indeed some academic colleagues who say it's wise not to use the term innovation. So in that respect, I disagree with Oliver. Instead, we should just be talking about, is it new or not? Is there evidence or not? And we should look at the balance between risk and safety. But I think that's something that should be shared by all jurisdictions globally. So that's a specific issue. In terms of the unpredictability and the disappearing devices, though, I completely agree. The system that we have now has turned out to be too expensive and too time-consuming. And I have, I think, some understanding of why that has been, which perhaps we can come back to in terms of changes to the structure in the system that we have in Europe.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah. Damien, I want to move to you because, like this was mentioned, you're a doctor, so I was hoping to, can you share with us what you're seeing in terms of how the problems with this directive are affecting also patients and doctor? Are you seeing devices disappearing? How is it affecting the work and also the life of patients?
Thanks again for the kind invite to be here. I'm a full-time clinician, so I treat babies, children, adults born with heart defects, of which there's about 40,000 born each year in the EU. It is a real challenge for us because we're dealing with increasing expectation from parents around delivering good results to patients. And unfortunately, at the moment, we're seeing a reduction in the tools that we have to treat those patients. And I think you can prepare for that, I suppose, if it's something that you know is coming and somebody gives you a list of, you won't have these devices next week, next month, next year. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're going into cases with very vulnerable children, trying to deliver the best care we can, asking for equipment that we had a month ago or 3 months ago, and we don't have it anymore. And the only time we're actually realizing it's not there is at the time, the pivotal time we're actually trying to deliver care. So it is a real challenge for us. You know, one of the conditions that some of these children are born with is called transposition of the great arteries, where the two main arteries coming out of the heart are swapped around. The first intervention performed on those children was back in 1966, and at the time it was revolutionary. In some ways, there was almost a sense of horror at what we were doing, tearing a hole in the heart through the umbilicus or through the belly button. And that balloon catheter that we've had for 60 years is now under real threat because we don't necessarily have it available to us anymore for a number of different reasons. But I think one of the major issues facing it is that the companies are looking at the return of investment at bringing it into Europe and saying that it's just not cost effective for us to do this. So a procedure that we've had for 60 years that we've innovated on and that is, you know, treated and saved thousands of lives, literally. And these children, when they're operated on, do extremely well. That may not be available to us now, and that's unacceptable. And it's not just even that necessarily that balloon catheter itself. If we then send those patients to surgery, the surgeons don't have the cannulas, which is the tubing that they put into the neck to be able to do the bypass surgery available to them in the sizes they need to operate on small babies. So across the board, we're looking at a huge amount of innovation, a huge amount of sweat, a huge amount of learning to be able to provide excellent care to these babies. Now maybe at threat that we won't be able to provide that anymore as a consequence, either directly or indirectly, of this new legislation.
Thank you, Damien, for sharing that. I think it helps paint a good picture of, in practice, these conversations that we're having, how they're having an actual effect on people's lives, on even children. And one of the issues here is, we're probably going to circle back to it, is that the regulation also foresees that we need to recertify devices that have been on the market already. But before we dive into that, I wanted to turn to MEP Katarina first. So as a lawmaker, I wanted to hear from you first. So if you have anything to add on what you're hearing the issues are of this regulation, and yeah, as a lawmaker, what are some of the ways that you're hoping that well, I know this conversation was already in the Parliament, but to bring this forward.
Well, let me say hi to everyone first, and I'm learning, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm not in the industry, but I believe that political decisions need to be science-based. I'm a strong believer on that when we are dealing with these issues, and I believe that we need to learn. And the thing is, the regulation was created because we had problems, really huge problems in Europe about patient safety. That's why we needed a regulation. And the regulation was created to answer to those problems and to make sure that everyone would have a device that is safe. And I think this is very important. And so when we talk about changing regulation, we should evaluate what we need to change. Because I'm sure that no one wants to go back to a period where we did not have regulation and there was not safety in the devices. So this is what we have to decide when we are policymakers. And the thing is, some of the problems that the industry faces don't have to do with the device regulation or the European device regulation. Some of the problems, as I understand, have to do with national regulatory bodies that are very different in different countries of Europe.
Not really.
In some cases, we are talking about private entities that are not even public entities, that the state says that they have they are a part of the certification. And in one country, it is one price, in another country, it's another price. Things are different. And so when we talk to different industries that are dealing with problems in different countries, we listen to different problems. So what I'm saying is we need to know where the problem is to change the regulation. If we don't know where the problem is, what are we doing? Are we simply deregulating and going back to a period where we were not sure about the safety of the devices? The other thing is that sometimes the devices that are not in the market don't have a problem with regulation because they're already approved. But the industry believes that now it has not enough profit from those devices and stopped producing them. And so, again, that is not a problem of regulation. That is a problem of how we handle when the industry doesn't want to produce something that we need. Is it devices or is it medicine? And we need to do it. And so the Parliament asked the Commission to make an assessment and evaluation of this whole process to see where the problems are. And so I believe that probably regulation will need some changes. I believe that it will need some changes. But I believe that to put safety, patient safety first, because that's how the regulation was born, we need to have that assessment. We need to have that evaluation. And then we will change whatever we need to change. But bearing in mind that patient safety is the #1 criteria.
Thank you, Katarina. It's great to get also insight from the Parliament and lawmakers. I wanted to see if anybody wanted to respond. I've seen a couple of people shake their heads when you're talking. So.
With pleasure. First of all, I fully agree patient safety comes first. It is the cornerstone of the regulatory system. And by the way, Europe did not start regulating medical technologies in 2017. Yes. We've been doing it for more than 30 years. It's absolutely true that these regulations were elaborated to modernize and strengthen the regulatory framework. Everyone was always in agreement that that was necessary, and the objectives of the regulation, the two regulations, remain absolutely sound. But it's also the truth that the way in which the regulations were written and the way in which they've been implemented over the last 7 years has resulted in a situation where in Europe we have the most strict, expensive, time-consuming and complicated rules to follow than pretty much anywhere else in the world. So the bar has been very substantially raised already, and we're now seeing consequences of that in the real world. It is absolutely true that in some cases companies are left with no other choice than to reduce the size of their portfolios because of cost, but also because of complexity and time to market. And we were saying for years that that was going to happen, going all the way back to 2017, 2018. Anyone who wants to look at some of the data surveys we've published on our website can find up to 1 in 3 of today's medical technologies may be discontinued because of the regulations. And so that is a really substantial threat to healthcare systems if action is not taken. So we are actually extremely supportive of the attention and action being given to this by the European Parliament and in President von der Leyen's mission letter to the Health Commissioner designate. And we hope the Council will weigh in very soon, echoing this need for action.
Thank you. I want to see if Alan also wanted to add something.
Thank you very much. I agree with what you were saying, Katarina, but I think it helps us to understand how we've got to the present situation to go back to when medical device regulation started. As Oliver said, the first directives in 1990. And during the 1980s, there was a drive by the Delors presidency to complete the internal market, a white paper on completing the internal market in the European Union, which came out in 1985, and also the statement from the Council that set up notified bodies, inspection agencies in Europe. Those both happened in 1985. The first initiatives by the Commission to develop the new directives started in 1988, when there was no medical expertise inside the Commission itself. And the people who started this, and I've been speaking to them recently to understand, they were directed to use the new approach. In other words, to use a new EU system that was designed for industry sectors to apply to healthcare, a completely different approach from the regulation of medicines that to us is still illogical. But now we still have notified bodies, we have national regulatory agencies, we have the Commission, and they're all responsible for different parts of the system, which leads to a lot of inefficiency. But the major inefficiency is how the staff can collaborate, because notified bodies are independent organizations. They've only within the last 2 years started to speak to each other about joint clinical standards or approaches to evaluating dossiers from manufacturers. But that's a huge issue. We tend to look at the US FDA as a paradigm, as a much better example. But if you look, as I've done, at the recent report from the Center for Devices of the FDA and the report from the Notified Body Association here in Europe, there are more medical device evaluators and expert assessors and regulators in Europe than the USA. The problem is we have 5,627 staff within the 35 notified bodies who reported as members of Team NB last year. And we have 20 people in the European Commission, including one medically qualified doctor dealing with this legislation and its implementation. And that just doesn't work. So in my opinion, there's a vacuum at the center of the European regulatory system, which is in terms of expert medical and scientific capacity to manage the system and to provide the flexibility that would make it possible to approve legacy devices without the very complex and overexpensive and time-consuming process. They can't do that because they're tied by legislation, by legal requirements, which each notified body has to do independently without being able to be jointly flexible. So I do believe that in this reconsideration of the regulations, we need some fundamental reorganization of a coordinating scientific center to change the structure.
Thank you all. I think this helps us paint a bit of a good picture of some of the things that are maybe not working well, some of the things that people are giving feedback on, from unpredictability. High cost seems to be a big one. One of the issues was also that it took a while at the beginning after the regulations started being implemented for notified bodies to be recertified. Now we have about 50, so I don't know if that's still a big burden or if now the other elements are weighing in a bit more. But does anyone else have anything more to add on the challenges? Because then I wanted to move a bit and talk about what some of the possible solutions could be.
We don't have a notified body representative here, but they have told us recently that they have free capacity. They have appointed extra staff because of the anticipated increased workload from implementing the regulations, but manufacturers have registered, but they're not coming yet with their dossiers. So that's no longer the bottleneck. At least for medical devices, there's probably still an issue which is separate and needs separate consideration for in vitro diagnostics.
Yes.
I suppose just as a clinician, I think patient safety is paramount to us as well. You know, if a patient dies on my watch, that's on me. And so I think it's really important that we're all committed to patient safety. But, you know, as Alan might attest to as a clinician as well, the safest way for us in some ways not to have a problem with the patient is just not to treat them. But that's not acceptable. That's not what we're here to do. So we do have to find solutions for that. And I think we don't often talk about the implications of the legislation we bring in on patient safety in relation to the detrimental effect it has. And I think that's something we need to be cognizant of as well. I think there's an inherent acceptance that we're all committed to ensuring we get the best outcomes for our patients. And this is about patients. This isn't about, you know, egos or, you know, I think we would all agree to that. But like, we do need to look at the offset of the implications of what we do on patient safety as well, and the inability to be able to deliver care that we were previously able to deliver as a consequence of not having the tools that we need. And I think it's especially important in our field because I deal with a small group of patients in relative terms, and you know, it'll come on to the concept of an orphan product and what that is, and the importance of legislating appropriately also for those vulnerable groups of patients who need a wideish variety of tools, but on small numbers, which again, from an industry perspective, there isn't a return of investment on that. So if we expect to have one policy that's going to exist for everybody and deliver for everybody, I think we're kidding ourselves. And we do need to be a little bit more flexible in looking at those vulnerable groups and what we can do to try and make stuff available for them that they need.
More flexible with the certification when we're looking at the standards and yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to?
I'd just like to add a different topic that wasn't discussed here, but was discussed, or I tried to be discussed at the European Parliament, is that part of the regulation also addresses the problem of transparency of the decision. And I believe that that part was not really implemented. And that is a problem for industry, and I believe it's a problem for the scientific community. Because one way to have flexibility but also safety is that the scientific community, can know the fundamentals of the decisions. Because we need lots of people to know that are informed, to know how the decisions are made and why the decisions are made. Because, well, those are the people that understand what is in place. And if we have more transparency, I believe that we can have more flexible and more easy decisions. Of course, I know the industry is divided in parts. They don't like more transparency, others do. I try to read everything that people send to me, and I read different things. But I truly believe that if we have a more broader range of what is, more people looking and what is being done as a scientific community, then we'll have more safety and more flexibility at the same time.
Thank you. So more bringing transparency into the conversation. I think that's it's a big piece that you're right, probably was missing from this. I will give you again the chance to respond, and then I do want to, I think Oliver first wanted to, and then we can,
Just to say that one thing I really like about this conversation is there doesn't seem to be fundamental disagreement among policymakers, stakeholders, or industry about the fact that something needs to be done. You know, we're turning from one commission to the next one. And if we look back on the first von der Leyen Commission, to the extent there was any serious engagement on this sector at all, it largely took the form of timeline extensions. 4 timeline extensions in 5 years, if you look across the 2 regulations. Many, if not all of those, were needed, by the way, and we were calling for some of them, because Europe was about to face cliff edges, and if it went over those cliffs, we would have had far greater shortages than are feared to happen now. So that's good. But the problem with extensions is, as is often said in English, it kicks the can down the road and postpones the difficult work of looking at some of the details in the regulations. Whether it's transparency, whether it's assessment timelines, whether it's the governance of the system. These are much more fundamental and challenging things to get right. But it seems clear to me, based on what we've seen in the mission letter and the parliamentary resolution, the institutions are increasingly ready to have that conversation. And what we are really interested to see now is what level of ambition will there be in terms of doing something bold and doing something early in the next 5 years. Because clearly there are problems starting to emerge already now. We cannot give another 3 to 5 years to fix it. Absolutely not.
Thank you. Alan.
I just wanted to come back on something Katerina said about transparency. I completely support what you've said, and we've campaigned on this for many years. But I think it will need legal change from you and your colleagues, because the fundamental problem is the legal protection, or indeed the legal restriction on notified bodies to be open about the evidence that they receive and the opinions that they give on that evidence. And ironically, you cannot read an opinion from a European notified body, but you can get all the information on the same device from the FDA website when it's approved there, and that doesn't make any sense. So for evidence-based clinical medical decisions, we need transparent review processes for medical technology, and it will need legal change, I believe, and fully support you to promote that. Thank you.
Thank you all. I love we're having a really engaging conversation, so thank you for also having a bit of back and forth. I think it makes it a great exchange of ideas. I wanted to move a little bit forward onto the possible solutions, because here we're talking about what we could do. And like it was already brought up, it was in the mission letter for the future health commissioner, although not in too much detail, just said that he will ensure availability and competitiveness of medical devices, including stepping up implementation of a current framework and evaluating the need for potential legislative changes. During his commissioner hearing, Varhelyi, if he gets approved, said that he will look at this, continue with what the Commission's plan is to finalize their evaluation that they're doing next year, and potentially look at some implementing acts to work in the meantime as some of the more urgent problems like orphan devices or pediatric devices. So there is some work in the EU. And then we have the resolution that was passed in the Parliament that you also mentioned. I want to talk about this one briefly and then get into what you think are some of the main things that should be addressed, because I think timeline might be something that we might disagree on again. So, well, not me personally, but to touch on it. So yeah, the resolution adopted by the Parliament called for an urgent revision. Katarina, I believe you were opposed to that one that finally passed, or can you tell me about what you thought about it? I think you had brought out their own resolution forward.
I think this debate is quite more interesting than the debate that we had in the European Parliament about this.
But, I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
No, I believe that every group that was involved in this discussion, not all the groups are interested in these kind of issues, but all the groups that were interested, I believe all the groups say that we'll probably need to, all the groups are open to change the regulation. The problem is, when do we change and how to make the decision? And I worked in the resolution, and then I end up voting against because of what we put first and what we put then. I believe that the European Parliament asked for an evaluation of the regulation and should be demanding of that evaluation before changing the regulation. And the resolution says that we are going to change the regulation. And the thing is, if we don't have the evaluation, we are just saying that we want to change, and we are not saying what we want to change. And I think the European Parliament can do better. The European Parliament should discuss and should say to the Commission something more than just change the regulation. Should say, we've looked to the evaluation, and we believe that this and this and this should be changed, and we ask you to act upon it. But after seeing the evaluation, what I didn't agree upon was we don't care about evaluation. We forgot that we asked an evaluation, and now we want to change. What do we want to change? We don't know. We just know that we want to change. So that I don't like. I think that, as you may know, well, the industry has a powerful lobby power in the European institutions. And of course, I believe that the industry should be heard about this. But I think if the European Parliament doesn't have a process of evaluation and political debate, then we'll have lots of industry and less on the other side. And I think we should listen to all the sides.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll move to industry after that to see what they think.
We can tell you what to change. We have a very granular view on this. Listen, I think it's absolutely legitimate for policymakers to act on the basis of evidence. That's absolutely clear. And that targeted evaluation, which the European Commission is doing, is an important input into that. It's meant to be finished end of 2025, so only 1 year more. The problem is, if we do nothing until then, we very quickly enter into a situation where a targeted evaluation finishes next year, then we discuss it in 2026. By the time legislation is actually started and maturing, we're in 2027, which is not only 3 years from now, it is 10 years since the regulations were published. Now, 10 years is the traditional time frame in Europe for us to revise legislation which is doing okay. This legislation is not doing okay. We're having real-life issues in the healthcare systems, sometimes for vulnerable patients like babies. So action of some kind should be taken sooner than that. We're not saying reopen the entire legislation and go completely wild on the basis of no evidence. But if there is opportunity in things like implementing acts or other non-legislative measures, for instance, to start addressing the situations which are known, that is the only responsible thing to do. And by the way, it is
But
not just...
that I agree upon.
Okay.
We didn't discuss it in the European Parliament.
Okay, because the targeted evaluation is important, but there are data surveys published by organizations like ours. There is publications by notified bodies. We know for a fact there's a problem with the assessment timelines. They should be more predictable. They should be shorter. We know the costs are meant to be more transparent and proportional. They're still not. Why not use some of the infrastructure we have now to actually deliver on these things? That, I can tell you, would already help tremendously maintain the industry's confidence in Europe and keep us betting on this region as a place to launch the devices that are needed.
I think it's good to keep in mind where there could be long-term and short-term solution. We're talking about both here, but so it sounds like if we want to talk about revising the actual regulation, opening it in terms of having a legislation proposal, that might require some more time. Implementing acts or things that can be done in the shorter term could address some of these problems. But so are you open, if there are things like implementing acts coming soon, are you open to waiting for the Commission to be done with their evaluation before we move on to actually addressing the regulation itself?
So we believe that in light of the fact that there are confirmed problems in the system now, whatever opportunities the legislator or the implementing agencies have to bring some relief in the current framework should be aggressively pursued, in parallel to considering legislation down the track. I think the risk is if we just look at one set of tools and forget about the other one, that's when we run into trouble. Because with the short-term tools we have in front of us, as Alan said, they're limited in what they can do. Legislation can do practically anything, but their time is the enemy, and there we risk exacerbating an already challenging situation. That's why Europe needs to make full use of the short-term and long-term tools at its disposal.
Okay, thank you. I want to bring Damien and Alan into this to hear from them what they think could be done.
Thank you. I first became involved in representing the views of cardiologists to the European Commission in 2008, when there was a public consultation for the recast of the directives. So for me, this is already more than 20 years, or will be by the time that the regulations are fully implemented. So it's been far too long, I completely agree, and it's been too slow. But I do think Parliament is wrong to force the Commission to do it as fast as possible, because what's important is to get it right this time rather than to do it as soon as possible, because we've seen this very long process giving us a system that we don't like in some respects. Some aspects are very good, but if I may say so, when we wrote a position paper before the recast of the directives, we asked for an agency, we asked for special pathways for innovation and for orphan products. None of those were put into the regulation, and we're now seeing these problems. So there is advice, there is expertise, there is experience that the Commission needs to use, and it's harnessing currently, and we should all contribute. There's a public consultation now for the end of the year with all sorts of opportunities to advise on this process. And so I do hope that that will be done as fast as possible, but without a timeline. In the meantime, I agree with Oliver, there are things that could be done fast, and some flexibility for legacy products, for orphan devices, for devices for children, could be done faster and would make a lot of sense.
Damien, what do you think?
I mean, with an amazing amount of respect to everybody else who's on I feel slightly like I'm sitting in a conversation with a set of parents who are telling me that I'm getting married in a few weeks without any kind of input into relation to who I'm going to marry or how it's going to happen. You know, I'm living this on a daily basis, and there's a clock ticking, and unfortunately I'm the one, and I don't mean to be very selfish about this, but I'm at the front line having to deliver discussions and, you know, very philosophical discussions in some ways, and I know they have importance and relevance, but, you know, there is a timeline here, and it is important, and we need to get on and get this done, because I think, you know, as a clinician, I know Alan is too, but I'm telling you this is having an impact on how we're delivering care, and so, you know, I'm not the legislator here. I do understand some of the nuances that exist around this, particularly in relation to the orphan product stuff, but there is an impetus on us to try and get this done relatively quickly and to try and come up with solutions And I think we can all agree that we want better patient safety and patient care at the end of this. So if we lock in as that as the focus, then I think we can make forward progress with it. But it does need to happen. I think we can't keep on going on saying we agree with each other and there's an issue here and there's an issue there and we need to look at that and we'll look at it next year. It took us 3 years for the MDCG to come up with a definition of what an orphan, group was, which is just too long. And so we need to get on with this, would be my feeling.
Thank you for that. Is it frustrating for a clinician sometimes, you think, to see this conversation drag on for
It is
for
frustrating.
so long?
I mean, and on a very selfish level again, I was doing a procedure last week on a 2-kilo baby that didn't have a surgical option. And so I said, can you pass me this catheter? And they said, well, we don't have it. And I said, really? When did that not be available anymore? And so you're trying to deliver care at a very, very critical juncture in very, very vulnerable kids, and you're just seeing a slow erosion of products that you previously had not available to you anymore. So, and it's stressful for me, it's stressful for the team, and it's, most importantly, it's not the right thing to do for our patients. Now, of course this has to be safe, but we can't take 10 years to make a decision on what that is. And I think specifically around the orphan product piece, we need to define what that is. We need to identify how many products are potentially orphan products, and then we need to protect them. We need to put legislation in place to protect them, and whether that's incentivizing it, whether it's in following the EMA model, whatever that is, we need to put it in place so that we can make it cost effective for industry to deliver and develop these products for us safely so that we can deliver them and use them for patient care. In a small vulnerable group of patients that we, as I said, treat a wide variety of diseases with a small number of products. And that's an inevitability. We have to come to a solution to that.
Yeah, I don't understand why we don't solve this. This has nothing to do with changing all legislation. It has nothing to do with it. This should be solved, this could be solved without changing the legislation.
The problem is that
this is a different problem.
Impact assessment for the regulation envisaged that the European Commission should have 50 staff to deal with this, and they have 20.
And that is not changing the legislation. It's not going to solve this.
The member states never gave the Commission the budget to deliver this legislation properly. And now they haven't the capacity to change things fast enough.
We have certainly seen time and time again in the last 5 years that when the member states give a mandate to the European Commission to take action left or right, the Commission does it. Right now, of course, we are all eagerly awaiting to see what will happen at the next EPSCO Council next month. What will be the level of consensus among the 27 member states? The Parliament has weighed in. The Commission has, to some extent, weighed in twice now between the letter and the hearings. Where are the member states? They are the ones who have key competence in this area. Will they share the level of urgency that we are having here on this panel? That is the golden question ahead of us.
Thank you all. We're actually over time, but I'm going to throw in one last question because I think we're still a really interesting conversation that we're having, and I love how involved everybody is. A few of you mentioned some of the things that could be done right away, like, for example, defining an orphan product, making sure that there are pathways for innovative devices. And I wanted to get really quick from you some of these examples of things that could be done. Also, flexibility with products that are already on the market. Should we not have the recertification, or should they just have quicker pathways? Or
Pathways for innovation are an easy one. We call these the new European regulations, but the reality is they're 7 years old, and by now every other mature region of the world has dedicated pathways for innovative medical technologies. We're not asking Europe to do anything revolutionary here, just catch up to some of the good examples that exist. United States is often mentioned as one good one, but there are other good practices in Japan, Australia, etc. We also believe the time has come to look very seriously at whether the certification of devices really does need to be repeated every 5 years. That's always been a European peculiarity, which made sense more than 30 years ago. But by the way, it was eliminated in pharmaceuticals because of pharmacovigilance. You could argue it's no longer really relevant today, and it doesn't exist in many other regions of the world as well. And by the way, whether it's delivered through an agency or some other structure, another thing we've really been missing, which could easily be put in place, is an ombudsman. If you feel that your regulatory decision was not the right one because the outcome was wrong or whatever, you've got no one to complain to in Europe. You have to go through the court system, which is tremendously long and complicated. That's another really easy, quick win that potentially could be put in place even without revising the regulatory framework. So there are plenty of ideas that can be read in our papers, and I know other stakeholders have proposals as well.
Thank you. Very quickly, if anyone else also wants to give.
Quickly from my side, I think we need much more flexibility for continuing market access to legacy devices, more than was specified in the regulation. And that could be implemented with support fairly quickly. I disagree with Oliver about 5 years. There are some devices where complications or problems only arise with long-term use, with implants, with valves, with hips, and so on. And so we do need some long-term surveillance that is supervised by the regulatory agencies or the notified bodies. And my third thing would be to produce device-specific standards. The directives and the regulations were always envisaged to be based on specific recommendations for specific device types. And again, it's an issue of capacity, but they just haven't been delivered. And we've been trying to help through a Horizon project called Core MD that we organized, and we are giving advice to the regulators for specific areas. But as a broad general field, that's a huge gap still.
Thank you. Damien?
Well, I just don't see how, and I'm coming back to my field, I suppose the orphan product pathway can exist with the notified bodies in place. I don't see how that exists as things stand, because it's too costly, it's too unpredictable, and I think the return of investment for companies too much. So by very nature of having that in place, unless we think outside that with expert panels, a separate agency that actually does internal evaluation, I think we are a threat.
Okay. Thank you.
I think orphan devices should be tackled in a completely different way, should have their own pathway. And I think that even if they are not industry cost effective, then we have to pay them as a community. I don't see no problem on that. That is a decision that has to be made. And yes, we have lots of this discussion that has to do with member states' decisions. And so I think we need member states to work on all of this also.
Great. Thank you so much, all. I'm going to have to stop you because we are a bit over time, but really thank you. I think it's been a really interesting conversation with a lot of very good insights from everybody. So round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. We are almost at the end of our healthcare summit. There's just going to be our editor, Helen, is going to come on stage for a wrap-up. But yeah, so thank you so much all for following. Thank you, guys. Sorry.
Reached the end of our healthcare summit, and we've covered almost every piece of EU healthcare legislation that's impacting patients either now or will do in the future. As well, some of the examples are the European Health Data Space, the Medical Devices Regulation, as we just heard, the Health Technology Assessment Regulation, the pharmaceutical legislation, as well as other initiatives such as the Beating Cancer Plan, non-communicable diseases, infectious diseases, antimicrobial resistance, crisis preparedness, as well as AI in healthcare. I don't think we could have really squeezed any more topics into the agenda if we had tried. I think one of the common themes is that there really are some challenges both in implementing these laws, as well as was clearly demonstrated on the panel just now for the medical devices regulation, but also in the European Health Data Space regulation as well. And this all comes at a politically challenging time for Europe, as we see greater polarization in the European Parliament, as well as the European Council and across the capitals. But I think you can agree with me that there is a real desire across all of the stakeholders in public health to find the right solutions to some of the problems that we've been discussing over the last 2 days. And one of the themes that seem to be consistent throughout some of the panels is that the language that we use, and that's our role as journalists as well, and throughout across the EU agencies and the people speaking from patients, right the way through the healthcare systems, it's really important that we use the right language that can get through with the right messages. I would like to thank all of our speakers who have joined us here over the last 2 days, without whom this would have not been possible, as well as our partners, FPS, Sanofi, Daiichi Sankyo, Gilead, Johnson & Johnson, MSD, the PPTA, and Intuitive. I'd also like to thank very much our events team for making this happen, without whom you wouldn't be watching us here today and yesterday. But also a really big thank you to the Politico journalists on the healthcare team, Mary, Deirdre, Rory, and Claudia. For all of them, this was their first healthcare summit. They are all new to the healthcare team this year. And I'm sure you can agree with me that they've all delivered a fantastic and very engaging summit. And we will continue to follow these topics, so thank you. We now have a networking reception until 5:30 in the main networking room, so enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
United in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?